Hi folks, Bud Yerly with Custom Flight Creations, your U.S. Airmaster dealer. Today I'm going to be reviewing Service Letter 1 for the AP332 propeller. And this works on any of the Airmaster propellers. In the past, I have gotten a number of calls from folks who are distressed that they've thrown grease all over their airplane and they can't figure out why the propeller is leaking so badly. We'll be going through the techniques on how to grease it, how to prevent that. It's in the service letter, but I'm going to add a few techniques that'll just help you out a little bit. If you have an airplane that's operating a pusher off of salt water, let it sling grease, it'll be fine. It'll may dirty up the rudder of the airplane, but that salt water will never get to anything. However, if you got a nice pretty white airplane, slinging grease can be a real irritant. I'm going to switch over now and I'm going to just show you for my greasing. I typically use Aeroshell 22 down here in Florida, but I also use Mobile 28. It's in a little bottle. It's just red grease. Your standard brush that you would use, also called acid brushes. A good Scott towel, shop towel that is not lint producing. And then finally, if you're so inclined, rubber gloves to just keep the mess down. And a bib doesn't hurt because you're eventually going to lean one up against you during the process. Let me change the camera angle. I'm going to show you the hub first, and then we're going to go to the blades. Okay, with the prop blade in the hub, I'm going to first do something a little different here. I'm just going to mark where the first screw is on blade hub 1. And the reason I'm going to do that is when it comes down time to tighten it down, I'll know about where it was before, and that'll kind of help me keep from maybe not squeezing the grease out as well as I should. I'm also going to just take a quick check, and it looks like about a 35 and a 45, maybe 50 thousandths is what the clearance is here. These propellers are generally very, very similar to the distance between this ring and this flat surface right here. So each blade will be about the same amount. If you've got one that's sticking up 1/8 of an inch higher, you clearly have got a problem. So that's what I do there. Now, to get the prop off, I use the spanner wrench supplied. It only has 8 foot-pounds. It should come off very easily. So let's just start unscrewing this. And once the blade's all the way out, the blade's actually not going to move, just the nut is going to move initially. And you're going to see that here in the film. Rolls pretty simple. And then once it's off here, a couple of quick jiggles, and the prop blade comes right out. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect both the seat here, down here, and I'm going to look at the inside of my hub. I'm going to tilt this hub up so that you can see a little better, and I can point out a couple of things. Number one, it's very clean right here on the inside where you can see this flat surface right here, and there's a little bit of grease down here. This blade had just a little shimmer of grease down here, but it was very tight against the side, and that's called the preload bearing slot. And we want to make sure that this is pulled all the way down in there. The other thing you'll notice is inside here, there are the areas where there's not a lot of grease. And one of the areas that I'd like to show you is right over here on the back side. Some of the grease is actually pretty thin. That should, in a prop, still be pretty full of grease. You notice that there's grease that has come out all around the edge of the prop. And the reason it's done that, and I'll wipe it off right here, and the reason it's done that is somebody filled up the threads really full. The other thing I'm going to make note of is how is my screw jack looking and how does my nylon drive block look. If they all look good initially, I will drive the prop all the way to fine. I will clean off the grease on the back side here, then I'll drive it all the way to feather, and then I'll check the front portion. I'll put new lube on it and I'll be ready to go. In the meantime, how do you get the grease out of this? Again, a lint-free shop towel. Come in here and start pulling out the grease. There's going to be a lot of it. Then I'm going to clean the threads as well as I can. Keep a trash can handy. You're going to be throwing away a lot of towels. I will take my fingernail and I will just rub it down through the each one of the threads, getting the old grease out. I'm going to wipe the grease from the center portion here, the nylon block, and I'm going to go into this slot here also, and I'm going to clean the grease out of that. Yuck. Okay. Like I said, now it's time. We've done one. We've slid the block back and forth a couple of times. We've cleaned out all the excess grease of the hub. Now it's time to go on to the blades. We're still in the cleanup mode here, and this is the blade that we just pulled. And what the procedure is nothing more than just grab a paper towel and start wiping. I'm not going to bore you to death with minutes and minutes and minutes of this, so we'll probably put it on fast forward and run it. Once I get everything off and clean, and we'll start the greasing procedure here. One of the things I would like to point out to you is there's a lot of grease that's on the inside of the flange here. There's an O-ring right here that has clearly has grease on the outside of it. Doesn't necessarily mean the O-ring was bad, just means that maybe there was too much grease in there. Okay, we've almost got it clean. A quick review here. This is the nut right here. This is the thrust bearing set. It's 2 washers. A roller bearing in between. And then another washer-like flat piece of steel, which is your race for it. This is the preload bearing. What we're looking for is, does this rotate nice and smooth? Is it making any noise? Has it got any grit to it? And then, is it wobbling? It shouldn't wobble. It should be very, very secure in there, and it should have no serious marking or scoring on it whatsoever. The other bearing over here is our thrust bearing, and I'm going to wipe this race, the flat washer-like thing, and I'm going to pull it apart, and then I'm going to wipe the other side of it. It should be thoroughly coated with grease from before. It should be absolutely smooth and have no problems whatsoever. No marks, no burrs. Then I'm going to take the bearing, lint-free cloth, and I'm going to wipe the bearing lightly. Once I've wiped the bearing lightly on that side, I'm going to pull the roller bearing down, and I'm going to wipe the other side. Then I'm going to wipe the inside of the race, pulling off all the grease off of that. And then finally, I'm going to pull this down, and there's always grease in here because everybody gets really excited about it. And there's an O-ring in here that prevents the grease in this nut from coming up and out of the prop. And everybody goes, well, I'm getting grease coming up the blade. Well, it's really hard. If you look, the grease can get up into this area right here, and it can streak out there, but most of the time the grease comes here, and you'll notice the streaks start right about here, running out after a lube, and that's the grease, which is nothing more than oil with a thickening agent. As time goes on, heat and pressure, that grease will break down into its two components. And when it does, the oil will leak out onto the blade. And it'll do that, especially in hot environments, for the first hour or so. Shouldn't get on the airplane though. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, like I did the threads on the hub, I'm going to do the threads on the nut. I want to make sure that the threads are clean, that they are undamaged. Boy, this is fun. Okay. Looking to make sure it's clean, undamaged, and that there's no burrs on here. Once I'm assured of that, I'm going to check over this O-ring right here. And I'm not going to pull the O-ring down, but there's always grease that's packed right up in there. And I'm going to take my fingernail and just very lightly come around here, especially with this particular owner because it had way too much grease. And as you thread this into the propeller hub, you'll find that the grease will tend, any grease that's in here will tend to creep up here and get onto the O-ring, compress, and then it's going to squirt out. And we'll show you a little bit how to prevent some of that. There's a little trough right in here. I like to fill that with grease too, but I got to get the old grease out of it. Once everything's wiped off, then we're going to go to the greasing procedure. Now the hub, I'm going to simply make sure that I've got plenty of grease on my threaded rod, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a light greasing of my my blades down here, or my threads down here. Now if I get grease in here, the threads are going to generally push it down. And it's going to go down into the center of the hub. And I'm okay with that. So I'm going to make sure I got a nice thin sheet of grease on my screw, just like I had on the nut. Now one thing I'm going to do though is the upper portion, I'm going to clean this so that it's just a nice sheen. It looks wet, but it's not. It's not overly greased, and it doesn't have a big glop of grease coming out at me. The next thing is I'm going to point out, just as I did before, I'm going to make sure that the area right here where the preload bearing and the thrust bearing are properly lubed. Put a nice red coat in there, and what I want to do is I want to get a little bit of a fillet of grease inside here. Pardon my head. You remember that depression that I showed you before? Right up in here. I want to fill that depression completely full. Right up to that first thread. And with that completely full, up to that first thread, when the prop is spinning, centrifugal force is trying to throw the grease out, it's going to hit the bottom of the screw that's going down in here, and it's going to flow out and completely envelop that thrust bearing, which is a good thing. We don't have to worry then about the grease being slung out of the prop and exposing our bearings for no lubrication. Now once everything is in, I'm just going to simply go around that lower part again. If you're using Aeroshell 22 or one of the heavier greases and it's November in Canada, please do not think that that grease isn't going to get hard enough to affect the torque. It will. The grease is going to be more like concrete. So a nice light grease is probably what you want to use. I'm making sure that my threads are coated and that any glops that I have are removed. Then I'm going to take a little extra grease and I'm going to coat my nylon block assembly. Make sure that that's got a nice coat of grease. And here's where I get ugly. I'll throw a glob of grease down here into this follower to make sure everything is fine. Okay. Again, we want to make sure we have grease all around where the lower bearing goes in. We want to fill that cavity completely. We want to have grease on the threads, but we don't want the grease to be thick. It needs to be almost transparent. Make sure that the top portion here is clean. Now when putting the blade in, there's going to be a chance that you're going to get some grease and there's going to be a little bit out, but we'll show you how to clean that later. Make sure your cam follower is lined up. Go in, set this blade down in, and once the whole blade slides in and the nut stops, you know that you've gotten good solid contact. I'm going to screw the nut in. You should always be able to screw your nut in with just your fingers. Shouldn't be difficult at all. A little hard on the fingers, but we're going to pull it around. Now what did I tell you about that grease around the bottom bearing? You remember I just put fairly good torque on this and it's already holding me up. Just that little bit of grease that I had in the bottom of the prop has already started hydraulically locking me out. So I'm going to pull the prop down, and I want you to watch this technique, and I want you to pull the prop down, snug, back it off. Pull it down snug, back it off. Pull it down snug, back it off. And then if I pull it down just a little bit snug, I wonder where I am on my mark. Oh, they're lined up. Saints be praised. Now I'm going to unscrew this one turn. Why? I'm going to take a clean piece of paper towel. What are the chances that I got a bunch of grease under here? Well, let's just see. Enough that it'll make a mess on the airplane. Grease, no matter how careful you are, you're always going to run the chance that you're going to get a little bit in and around that inside hub. This is doubled up. making it a little hard to get in there. There we go. I'm going to wipe the grease out of here. Got a good amount. Fold it over and get the back side one more time because I didn't do a good job here. Yeah, told you I didn't do a good job. There's some more grease. Now once I've done that, I can pull it down and prepare for final torquing. To torque this, what we want to do is we always want to put our torque wrench 90 degrees to the hub, to the wrench, and we want to simply pull to get our full torque. Now this can be done either way. You can do it this way, you can do it this way, whichever way you want to do it. Now for those of you who are a little unsure of yourself and are concerned whether or not this will slip off and cause trouble, I'm going to pull a 3/32. You can always pull these completely out, and you can put a 1032 screw into where this this particular Allen head screw was set. Now for me, I'm just going to, for the purposes of videography, I'm just going to pull it up. There it is. There's 8 foot-pounds. That's all there is to it. And I'm going to show you those original marks that I put on the front of the hub right here. It's right next to the number 1, and there's the mark. They're almost exactly where they were before. Let's take a look now with the feeler gauge. I wonder where I am with the feeler gauge. That'll be interesting to see. I'm going to waste your time here for a second. 35 and 15. Saints be praised, it's the same. So the blade is set. Now all I have to do is screw these down by putting a little Loctite. We take a little Loctite, put it on the thread. I'm going to turn the Allen head down till contact, and then I'm going to demonstrate to you pinky tight, and that is take your finger, hold the wrench, and then pull it until the 3/32 wrench just starts to flex. When it starts to flex, that's enough. It's tight. Take your torque seal. After you've finished, wipe off your excess of your Loctite and then put a drop of torque seal, and that'll tell you that you've accomplished your task. And that is how I do my propellers here, and how I keep from slinging grease all over, not just the propeller, but the airplane. Because if the grease comes out of here, it goes through these holes here into the spinner housing, goes back, gets onto your slip rings, and just makes a mess out of the airplane. Be clean and neat in your work, be thorough, and you'll never have a problem with the Airmaster propeller.